This Notebook LM video investigates the historical and legal reasons behind the persecution of Jesus and his earliest followers. Religious dissent was seen as political rebellion. After Jesus' execution, the apostles faced similar charges. Accusations shifted between heresy, blasphemy, and sedition, but the outcome was consistently fatal.
All right, today we're cracking open a historical case file. We're going to look at the story of early Christianity not just as a faith, but as a full-blown criminal investigation. We're going to explore exactly how its founders went from preachers to prisoners of the state.
So let's just jump right into the big question, the one that drives this whole thing. Why? Why were Jesus and his most important followers actually executed as criminals? I mean, this is a question that takes us way beyond just theology and drops us right into the middle of ancient law and politics.
Because, the answer, at least according to the people in charge back then, it wasn't really about faith at all. It was about crime. And we're about to unpack the specific charges, the actual legal framework that was used to turn a spiritual movement into a capital offense. Okay, but to understand the crimes, you first have to understand the crime scene. And that scene is first-century Roman-occupied Judea. I want you to picture this place. It's just simmering with religious passion and political tension. It's basically a powder keg, and any new movement could be the spark.
And this quote right here, it gets to the absolute core of what the authorities were afraid of. You see, religious dissent, what they called heresy, it wasn't just some polite theological debate. Now, it was seen as a political danger, a threat that could literally tear their community apart, and, maybe even worse, get the Roman Empire involved. And nobody wanted that.
So, let's get into the legal code itself. I mean, to build a criminal case, you need charges, right? So we're going to break down the three main accusations that just keep popping up in this story: heresy, blasphemy, and the big one, sedition. First on the docket is heresy. Now, basically, this just means having beliefs that go against the established ones. But here's the kicker. The definition was totally fluid. It wasn't written in stone. And that flexibility is what made it such an incredibly powerful weapon. You could use it to label almost any idea that rocked the boat. Next up, we've got blasphemy. Now, this was a way more serious charge, directly insulting God or claiming to be God. And while it was definitely a capital crime, there was a huge legal hurdle. To actually get a conviction, the prosecution usually had to prove that the accused had explicitly used God's most sacred name. I mean, think about that for a second. That is a super high bar for evidence, which made it surprisingly hard to prosecute. And finally, we get to sedition. This is the one that really mattered to the Romans. This was a political crime, plain and simple, trying to start a rebellion. For the Roman governor, all that theological stuff was just noise. But rebellion? That was a direct threat to the empire, and it was absolutely punishable by death. And this slide really lays out the whole legal drama perfectly. You've got two different court systems. On one side, the Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, who are focused on religious crimes like blasphemy, and on the other, the Roman governor, who only cares about political crimes like sedition. The crucial difference? Rome held the power of the sword, the potestas gladii. They were the only ones who could legally execute someone. So the strategy becomes crystal clear. If you want someone dead, you have to turn a religious crime into a political one.
So, how did this all play out for the prime suspect, Jesus himself? Let's open up his case file and look at his actions and his teachings like pieces of evidence that the prosecution would have used to build their case.
And in that evidence file, three accusations are front and center. First, breaking the Sabbath rules. Second, forgiving sins, which was seen as something only God could do. And third, claiming to be divine. Now, this last one was often tied to him using the title Son of Man. To us, that might sound humble, but to his audience, no way. It was a direct callback to a powerful heavenly figure in the book of Daniel. So when he said it, everyone understood he was claiming divine authority.
These accusations, as you can imagine, led straight to a trial. But this wasn't some fair and balanced legal proceeding. The whole process, from the verdict all the way to the handover to the Romans, it really feels like the system was rigged from the start.
I mean, just look at the legal problems here. First, the trial was held at night. That was illegal for capital cases. Then, the court was actively trying to find false witnesses. The high priest literally forced Jesus to incriminate himself, which was another violation. But the final point is the most unbelievable. The guilty verdict was unanimous. Now, you'd think that means the case was solid, right? Wrong. Under Jewish law at the time, a unanimous verdict was seen as a sign of a conspiracy, of mob rule, and it was supposed to lead to an acquittal.
So with this shaky conviction for the religious crime of blasphemy, the leaders had to go to Rome. And this is where that brilliant legal pivot happens. They completely reframed the charge. When they stood before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, Jesus wasn't a blasphemer anymore. He was a traitor. The accusation became, he claims to be the king of the Jews. That's a direct challenge to Caesar, an act of sedition that Pilate simply could not ignore.
But the story is far from over. After the leader was executed, the authorities reopened the case file. Now their attention turned to the apostles, who they saw as just continuing the exact same dangerous movement.
So, what was the apostles' crime? Well, two big things. First, preaching the resurrection of Jesus. This was a direct slap in the face to the Sadducees, the powerful temple priests who didn't even believe in an afterlife. Second, they started challenging the temple and the law. Especially when Paul began welcoming non-Jews into the fold, that was seen as a massive threat to the very core of Jewish identity.
And this chart just lays out the brutal consequences. You can see the pattern so clearly. First, Stephen is stoned for blasphemy. Then James, son of Zebedee, is beheaded as a political threat. Even James, the brother of Jesus, is stoned for being a breaker of the law. The charges shift, the authorities change, but the deadly outcome stays the same, all leading up to Peter and Paul being executed by the Roman Empire itself.
So, as we close this historical case file, it's pretty obvious these weren't simple arrests. The charges of heresy, blasphemy, and sedition, they reveal this incredibly intense clash between theology, complicated legal maneuvering, and just the raw, brutal reality of political power.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending question. The founders of Christianity were condemned as heretics and criminals by the most powerful people of their time, and yet their heresy eventually became the official religion, the orthodoxy, of an entire empire. So it really makes you think, how does our whole view of history, of power, even of truth itself change when we realize that what's a crime in one era can become the cornerstone of the next?